Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the Voice of Reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and the Ukraine. Now, over the last 24 hours, there has been a series of Russian missile strikes against the city of Kharkiv. We believe that the Russians were targeting Ukrainian military locations within the city of Kharkiv. Also, there is the possibility, a very distinct possibility, in fact, that the Russians were targeting Western military contractors located in the town of Kharkiv. Now, what's interesting is the Swiss Foundation for Mine Action, the FSD, has reported that its office in Kharkiv was damaged during a Russian missile attack on the city on the morning of the 24th of July. The foundation said that the building where it was located, as well as some vehicle and equipment, had been significantly damaged in the attack. We were relieved to confirm that none of the foundation's staff was killed or injured, the FSD said, adding that it is taking immediate steps to ensure the safety of its staff and support all those affected by the attack. The Swiss Foundation for Mine Action stressed that it would continue to provide humanitarian mine clearance services and support to the people of the Ukraine. Now, look, I've talked about this before. The existing Ukrainian military bases, many of those have been destroyed, especially close to the frontline engagement zones. So the Ukrainian military has to operate out of some location. The forces of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which are present on the ground in the Ukraine. There are U.S. forces present on the ground in the Ukraine, albeit there are special operations forces, units or elements of the Central Intelligence Agency. These forces are absolutely on the ground inside of the Ukraine. Now, obviously, the CIA, other national intelligence organizations belonging to EU nation states, these agencies are not going to place their personnel in Ukrainian military bases. They are not going to put those personnel in Ukrainian intelligence facilities, SBU facilities. That's not going to happen because those facilities are a high risk of being struck. Now, I do believe there are certain targets in which both sides have agreed not to strike. What those targets are, difficult to say at this point, but I do believe for both sides, right now, there are some off-limits targeting going on. When you see the fact that some of these Western leaders visit the Ukraine, the Russians know where they are at, and the Russians could reach out and strike some of those political leaders if they want to. But there's behind-the-scenes negotiations that go on that prevent that from happening. I believe that it's a very real possibility the Russians could eliminate Zelensky. But for whatever reason, they've chosen not to do that as of yet. Now, this strike on this mine clearance humanitarian operation, this is something different. Obviously, this is a pseudo-military operation that was going on. And obviously, in all probability, there were additional military assets operating out of that building. Either Russian HUMINT and or signals intelligence designated that area as a building of interest that that contained either foreign military operatives that were within the bounds of Russian strike capability and strike clearance, meaning they had clearance to go after that Western target, and they did. Now, the Ukrainians do not report on casualties. Probably in another month, we may be able to obtain intelligence on exactly what was struck in that building, and maybe get some information and or intel about fatalities that that some of these Western intel organization and or contractors may have suffered in this strike. I guarantee you, if that building was being used as an area in which these contractors were operating out of, it's a high degree of possibility that there were casualties. Now, there could have been a bunker under that building, and from the look of the strike, from the pictures that I've seen of the building, it does not appear that the Russians were using bunker penetrating bombs. They would have used a much larger asset to destroy that building. That building would not exist. It looks like it suffered moderate to severe structural damage. However, it doesn't look like the Russians used some sort of subsurface attack method to penetrate into the bunker underneath that building. So again, difficult to say what was being housed there, what was operating out of that building. Just difficult to say at this point, but I can guarantee you that it was just not a humanitarian mine-clearing operation that was operating out of that building. Many of these buildings now in Kharkiv are being used as multi-use buildings. Okay, they're being used by the Ukrainian military to house troops, to quarter troops, to house headquarters buildings, and again, it's just not the fact that existing military bases are being used. They're just not doing it. Many of these bases have been destroyed. Also to note, what's interesting, specific towards Kharkiv. Now, look, we know that this satellite photograph has not been updated recently, so this is not going to give us an accurate view of the destruction of any buildings in downtown Kharkiv. So this city, the city of Kharkiv, contains many factories. Okay. And the information that we have right now is that the Russians are not necessarily targeting many of these factories in and around Kharkiv. So why are the Russians not bombing these factories? Here, the Kharkiv State Aircraft Manufacturing Company. Okay, this facility has military applications. So why hasn't it been destroyed? Well, we believe that at some point the Russians believe that they are going to take control of this facility and quite possibly use this facility in the Russian military-industrial capacity, the Russian military-industrial complex. So that is probably why we are not seeing the Russians target some of these crucial defense sector buildings still operating in Kharkiv. Now, we do believe that if the Russians seize control of Kharkiv, it's not going to be through a siege of Kharkiv. It's not going to be through a column of Russian tanks and assault groups entering the city. We believe here at MFAN that the Russian goal is to seek the Ukrainian capitulation of Kharkiv, that we will eventually possibly see a general uprising in the city wanting to go over to the Russian Federation as well. there are lots of individuals, lots of Russians, probably the majority of the population of Kharkov, that really don't see themselves as Ukrainian. Many see themselves as Russian. And that is why we are not seeing the Russians obliterate Kharkov. It's just not happening. So the Russians believe, through attrition and continued warfare along the general front lines, that at some point the Ukrainian military is going to collapse, and at some point they're going to be able to roll into Kharkov, just like the Germans rolled into Paris, just like the American army rolled into Paris, without having to fight for Paris, without having to fight for Kharkov. And we think that's the goal that the Russians are looking forward to at this point. Again, seeking the ultimate destruction and degrading of the Ukrainian military, where much of this territory in the east is eventually capitulated. And what that will look like, you'll see the collapse of the Ukrainian military. You will see the collapse of the political apparatus of the Volodymyr Zelensky regime in Kiev. You know, the beacon of democracy, the one that has suspended the Constitution, instituted martial law, and there's no longer elections. Yeah, that beacon of democracy. Yep, that's it. So again, we're watching things very, very closely. The Russian offensive along the line of contact continues, and it is continuing relentlessly. If we go over to the run over to the deep state map real quick, and we go to some areas where there is ongoing fighting, the area northwest of Avdiivka. You know, after the Avdiivka nut was cracked, Russian military forces continue to advance. And what we're seeing now is the Russians enveloping Ukrainian military units. Individual Ukrainian battalion battle groups right now are being enveloped slowly but surely by the Russian military. And then those units are either surrendering or being destroyed in zone. If we go back real quick and we kind of look at the time lapse of this locale here, so we'll kind of go back where you, the viewer, can see what has happened just in the month of July. Okay, this is not a significant time period. Look, if this was a Ukrainian operation, the Western media would be all over this. Look, the Ukrainians are driving back the Russians, and there's not much the Russians can do. But let's look at this area. We're gonna just kind of lapse, and you the viewer, and then, look, this is a Ukrainian supported map site, so this is probably a little bit dated, and you could clearly see the Russians just slowly moving to the west, taking control of territory, and that's what's happening. And it's going to continue. So there we have it. Thank you for joining us today. More to come very, very soon. As always, have a good day.